Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Mark Hughes. I'm the co-faculty director of the Kleinman Center for the last 10 years now. And today we are in day 4 of Energy Week, a great Energy Week. I believe you'll all agree this time through. Tons of events, a few more tomorrow, including time with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. But today we are concluding day 4 with one of our very favorite kind of annual repeated events of this week, which is our alumni panel, a chance for some of our distinguished alums, including this year, I believe one who was a recipient of the certificate program, right? Corey, I'm looking here. Thank you. That was a passive confirmation nod, but I waited for it. I got it. Which is a kind of a wonderful full circle for us here at the center, that we've been around, and Penn has been kind of raising its visibility and impact in this space for long enough that we've actually got former students who are coming back as distinguished alumni. So that's terrific. What we're going to do today is I'm going to turn it over to the founder of the feast, Scott Kleinman. He will allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves, and then we'll begin a Q&A that'll start on the dais and kind of eventually grow out into the room. But it seems just right that I introduce Scott rather than allow him to introduce himself. None of this, which includes this wonderful space that we are privileged to occupy and have for a decade at Penn. No one who comes to Penn's campus these days, especially when they enter this building, has any doubt at all about the prominence and the importance and priority of energy policy, research, and teaching at Penn, right? We occupy a spot in the very heart of campus, very visible. So from that to the programming that we're allowed to do, to the new faculty that we have recruited to Penn, both in terms of the resources, but also more importantly, in terms of the vision that accounts for these changes at Penn, it really is Scott Kleinman, who is celebrating his own 30th class year, right? This spring, in only 30 years. Scott has embarked on an amazing career at Apollo Global Management, in particular, a couple of years at Smith Barney before then, which I always love. But really 2 years after graduating, he joined the firm. And just a few years later, kind of a meteoric rise, became lead partner for private equity, and now is co-president in charge of all of the revenue producing operations at the firm. And along the way in 2014, he came back to Penn and helped establish the center. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott. I hate to get off the stage because I could keep on going. I hate to get off the stage anyway, but I could keep on going about Scott for a long time. But Scott tonight is sharing his time with all of us, trying to unpack and explore some of the experiences of other Penn alumni in this space. So Scott, turn it over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mark. That was one of the nicer introductions I've ever had, so I really appreciate it. Maybe before we introduce the panelists here, I'd touch on one more anecdote around the founding of the center, and one of the purposes, that when Mark and I were really trying to create what is it we're trying to do here? What are we trying to create with the center? It really was an opportunity to bring energy and energy policy discourse to campus. This was, if you remember, 2014, climate sustainability, it was not, the top news story every day. It was kind of, people didn't talk about energy. It just wasn't something, it just was there. It was there when you turn your lights on or you turn your car on. But having spent my career investing in the space, and seeing some of the trends that were happening, I knew that, or at least I had a strong feeling that this was going to become a lot more relevant, and that young people were going to really care about this. And so what we wanted to do was bring what is really a multidisciplinary concept, the science, the business, the law, the policy together and be a hub to bring all of that work that was starting to happen on campus together in one place. But almost more important than the research and all of the good stuff that the center could do, it really was, for me, focused on getting students to actually care about energy and the energy transition. And sustainability wasn't a word back then, but the precursors to that, and want to make that part of their life and their life's journey. And the center was always set up partially to create opportunities to be able to do that. And so it really is great, and I really do love panels like this where we can talk to folks who, in some form or another, touch energy and energy policy, and have really built their lives around it. And so, as we just talked today, we'll talk about that and how, what inspired them and how, they found themselves going down that path. And, we'll expand on a bunch of those concepts. But, first off, thank you guys for joining us. We've got 4 great Penn alum, mostly before one of them actually did touch, as Mark alluded to, touch the center in a very important way. But hopefully, these are, thoughts and ideas that as the center, becomes more and more and does more things and has more capabilities, more students like, this will come into the world and be relevant. So with that, why don't we just start at the end and folks can introduce themselves, give, 30 seconds of their background, and then we'll jump right in.
Hey all, glad to be with you today. I'm Don McGraw. I am the Deputy Director of Energy Services and Operations for the City of Philadelphia's Office of Sustainability, which Mark has been a big part of birthing. And so it's great to be here. I am a Master's of Environmental Studies grad from 2013. And since then, I've been working with the city for over 8 years. It's been a lot of different, looking at energy management. So I oversee the Municipal Energy Office team, which really does a deep dive of, all the city-owned assets. So over 600 buildings, 5,000 vehicles. How are we decarbonizing them? We have our Municipal Energy Master Plan, so a framework on how we're moving that forward. But also, like, what citywide policies can we help develop? So, like, the City of Philadelphia's building energy performance policy was piloted with our building stock and then brought out. And then now we're looking at building performance standard and what that'll look like, and really taking advantage of Inflation Reduction Act money and seeing how we can utilize this and really kind of like build out our network of electric vehicles and, electrifying buildings and adding more smart building technologies.
Hi, everyone. Rob Ritchie, Director of Energy Storage at Nexamp. I am a 2015 graduate. I actually was looking around and was like, who's the person that did the certificate? Oh, that was me. Yeah, so it was a certificate recipient here through the Kleinman Center back in 2015. Mechanical engineering, bachelor's and master's degree then. Took a few stops on my career journey before ending up at Nexamp, but have been there for the last 6 years. I lead the strategy and technology vertical of our energy storage business. Nexamp is the largest community solar developer in the country. We develop, build, own, and operate solar and energy storage projects throughout the U.S., have projects from Maine to Hawaii, ranging from smaller DG scale on up through utility scale. So really excited for the discussion today.
Maybe. There we go. Hi, everyone. Technology issues aside, I'm Rashika Ghosh. I work at the Philadelphia Green Capital Corp. We are a green bank entity in Southeast Pennsylvania. We spun out of a municipal government entity in the city of Philadelphia and have since expanded broadly across the region. Don't know how familiar folks are with green banks, but we don't do the whole like checking account, savings account aspect. It's really meant to be more of a vehicle for investing money into the clean energy economy. Since we focus really in Southeast Pennsylvania, we're leveraging a lot of the great work that's already happening in Philadelphia and in the region, and really focusing on driving more money towards low-income communities, figuring out how to make energy efficiency and clean energy just more of a topic of interest, and also just bringing in money from both traditional sources of capital, but also like the federal government, and figuring out how to just make technology just something that is more accessible and thinking about how to make financing also more cost effective. So excited for the discussion today.
Thank you. Hey, everybody. Asim Kapoor. I am part of General Motors. I've been in the clean tech space for about 2 decades and have a host of experiences on the energy industry, working for utility. And more importantly, now I run a small venture within General Motors that's focused on energy and charging solutions to support our EV portfolio. And it's a very interesting space at the transaction, as we are transitioning between energy needs for the transportation electrification sector. And, we're actually coming up with the charging and energy solutions to help our B2B and B2C customer segments. So really excited to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Great, great. Well, maybe I'll start with a question, and you can say no or nothing. But looking back at your time at Penn, were there certain classes or certain things that really sparked your journey to where you are today, that got you on this path into the clean energy space? Or if not, was it something else serendipitous that did? And we'd love to hear it. I'm sure folks would love to hear that. So maybe Sam, why don't we just go down the line and
Yeah,
start there?
sure. So, it's interesting. When I went to Wharton, I was the only person in my class who had energy background, and I had the opportunity to take the energy policy course that was actually taught by the center, as part of the MBA program. And having been in the industry, I would say at that point in time, like close to 15 years, I was amazed at the amount of information that I picked up and the insights that I learned about, just where policy is and how impactful it can be in terms of understanding and taking a long view. And then, I still remember like one of my key takeaways from that class was, look, we can solve for everything if we just had a carbon tax. But I also learned since then how controversial that topic is. But nonetheless, it was probably one of the best classes I took, at Penn, which was very foundational in terms of expanding my understanding, and I highly recommend it if you haven't taken that.
Right.
Honestly, that was my favorite class here as well. The energy markets and policy class. I recommend that to all of our interns that come through PGCC to be like, take that class. It will teach you a lot about the language of working in the space, which is really impactful. For me though, I started my career working in energy and sustainability. I worked in like a more engineering role, more on the technical side of things. So by the time I came to Penn, my MBA, I was really curious about how to like pivot my career in energy, but more into like learning the skills and learning the languages to like get more of those hard skills down. And so I actually wasn't really sure if like the coursework necessarily like drove me to like where I am in my career path, but I will say something I really enjoyed was just getting more involved with like the energy club and then like the network of alumni here. They were just really impactful as a way of just learning more from people who are already doing this work and better being able to figure out like what additional career opportunities existed in the space, which I didn't necessarily have the best line of sight to for a really long time. And so getting a sense of like what a future career could look like 2 years down the line, 5 years down the line, like 8 years down the line, that was really helpful for me to kind of like figure out what are the skills I want to learn and grow in, and then use that to kind of like figure out what I might want to do now and what I want to grow into, especially now that, so I'm about 3 years out from my MBA. So I'm kind of in that point where I'm like, okay, like I feel like I'm not super new out of school, but I'm still trying to figure out where I can still grow as like both a leader in the industry, but also just learn to build some of the skills that, I still want to develop. So I feel like the alumni network has still been one of the things that I still leverage even now. And that's been super impactful for me.
Would you have had that perspective as an undergrad, or was it really
No.
only because you worked and then went back as an MBA?
100% because I worked and went back. I think having some work experience for me a little bit was helpful because I knew kind of what I didn't like in work stuff and like how to think a little bit more about leveraging like connections and contacts in the space. I was actually telling this to our coffee chat group, like networking was definitely hands down one of my least favorite things to do. And now I do it on a fairly regular basis because I enjoy it to some capacity and I like the outputs of it and I like meeting new people. But again, as an undergrad, 10 out of 10 would not have been doing that in the same capacity I do now, or even did in an MBA.
Rob?
Yeah, I was in an interesting spot where I was in the engineering school, but knew I didn't really want to be a technical engineer. So similar, similar experience, it sounds like to you. And so I came in, to the certificate program and, worked closely with Corey at the time to figure out how could I customize my coursework to fit my interests. And that was one of the things that I really, saw value in. And I'll echo, the course that, you both mentioned. I'd also highlight, there was an energy econ course I took through Wharton with Arthur Van Bentham that was supremely impactful and just helped open my eyes a bit to the business side of the industry and, helped me to chart that pathway where I could, have some technical exposure in my role, but be more strategic and more commercially minded as well.
I think for me, so I originally went, originally went to grad school for computers and I did IT leadership at LaSalle. And I think then getting more into the sustainability space, I was just like, I need to do something, right? Like I want to be as impactful as possible. And coming from a technology background, I was trying to figure out what that was. And I think that, I took Andy Humler's energy class. I don't think he's here today, but I've seen him a lot through the events this week. And that for me was like, it's definitely energy, right? Like that is the most impactful thing that I can do. And I'm going to use my technology background to figure out how I can make this happen, whether it's, like powering down servers or, shutting down all the computers at night. I'll figure it out. But that was the thing for me that was like kind of really kind of came around. And then I, it's also, I'm going to steal the alumni network. Like, I heard from, because that was the thing. I was like so overwhelmed of like, I want to do something. What can I do? And I was talking to one of the alumni and she had told me, it's like, think about what you already bring. You don't have to reinvent yourself. And what can you bring to, to work on climate work and don't, you're not starting from scratch. Right. And so, that's when I started thinking about, building automation systems and how we can, get smarter buildings. And that led to where I'm at now. I will also say too, I got my job currently because of my connections at Penn and someone I went through the classes with, and so just keeping up with that network and communicating with them and letting them know where you're at, I think is always helpful too.
So I think I'm learning that I shouldn't be encouraging my kids to be engineers because because you all want to do something different. Also, it sounds like if you haven't taken the energy policy course, it's probably a good course to go take. So that's great. That's great to hear. Maybe this is obvious to everybody in the room because they're here for this type of a session, but can you just talk a little bit about like why you think it would be rewarding for someone starting out in their career to come into, some sort of a job, doesn't matter what specifically, but some sort of a job, or you can make it something specific, but some sort of a job in the energy transition, sustainability space. Just what do you love about it? What do you think folks will find rewarding or has been especially rewarding to you? It could be extremely practical. It could be emotional, whatever. But since you have the mic, why don't we start with you, Dom? Yeah.
I think for me, it's really like the end impact, right? So I guess like it's not just energy. If we talk about energy, it's very like abstract and like, what is a kilowatt, right? And like who's seeing it, right? But I think really for me, it's like how is what we're doing like working on the building envelope and like weatherizing the home or the facility or replacing the lighting. We're replacing all the street lights throughout the city and we're adding a lighting management system. And so does it save energy? Well, yeah, that definitely saves energy, but it also brings all these additional impacts that help human health across the city. It's going to decrease vehicle crashes because of the visibility that it's giving. So like I think that a lot of energy work has a lot of co-benefits and a lot of them end up being health specific. And so I think that again, going back to, I think energy, I'm very biased clearly, but I think like energy is so impactful. And so, well, but the co-benefits to me and how it impacts people, I think is really, really something that I find rewarding.
Yeah, I mean, I find it beneficial to be a part of something every day that's really mission driven. And I think as we think about energy, there's a ton going on in the space that's only ramped up over the last couple of years with the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, more and more opportunities out there, and it's still not enough, right? We're not even close to it being enough. And that's energizing every day to come into that and know that there's just a bigger and bigger challenge to continue to work on. You know, a couple of projects that I've been working on recently help to, you know, show that impact. It's two secondary schools, a high school and an elementary school, brand new construction, net zero, and we're doing the solar and the energy storage associated with them to make them a microgrid and help just pull the whole energy picture together. And to see that all, you don't always get it all in one bite. Sometimes it's a piece here, a piece there, energy efficiency in one location, solar in another, maybe a battery somewhere else. But to see it all in one place and have it impact, you know, the next generation and have them grow up and get their education in an environment where they're seeing this every single day is just very impactful.
Cool.
This is like, it feels like a really easy question to answer because I think I would echo both of what's already been said. But I think for me, another aspect of it that I always found really empowering is the fact that it's a bunch of smart people who are very excited about the work that's being done and are like ready to like dive in and solve the problems. And for me, that's just like a really nice and collaborative environment to work in. I value that in all the teams and stuff that I've worked in as like cool people to work with. And that's so influenced the jobs I've taken and then the roles I've taken on. So for me, that's just been a really great way to, you know, stay engaged. I also think energy broadly also, because there's so many different aspects to energy, there's just a lot of like community also around it. Like in addition to like work stuff that I'm involved in, I've also been able to get involved more in like a network of like young professionals who are interested in the space and constantly like continuing to learn and grow from them. There's so many aspects of energy because of how broad the term is that I don't see every day. So it's been kind of great to learn from my peers, learn from other folks in the space as well. And again, I just always feel like I'm constantly learning and growing, which is great. And I know you can do that across a lot of different industries, but I think in energy, because there is a little bit more of it feels like more of a direct impact and a tangible impact that I really appreciate that people can get really excited by.
Thanks. I think I'll probably build on that a couple of themes. I do find that energy sector, like, you know, the professionals are typically very patient. You know, they're driven to solve problems, you know, because it's such a mission-driven work. At the same time, I think it's for what drives me and personally what I've found really rewarding is that you can, you know, take a problem and you can work towards solving it and you can, you know, change people's lives. And for us, like a simple thing, you know, like just, and Don and I were talking about this, like charging infrastructure, right? As we're rolling out our core product, which is to sell EVs, you know, how do we actually help transition? And for the first time, you know, General Motors as an OEM has to now think about, you know, how to fuel the vehicles and how to help our customers transition. And, you know, our entire organization's learning, you know, what does it actually mean, you know, to charge a vehicle and how to think about charging. And to that end, you know, we're really grappling with a lot of challenges. Like, how do you actually get the infrastructure there? What's the total cost of transition? What's the cleanest way to do it? And in the process, you realize that, you know, you can lean in, like, you know, a firm like ours can actually has, you know, significant supplier power and, you know, dealer networks that can, if we can mobilize that scale, that we can actually be very, very impactful in terms of how we can drive a solution towards that. So I would, you know, probably say, I think it's the opportunity to be able to have a long view, and then anything that you do is going to change the world is probably one of the most rewarding aspects of being in the energy sector.
You guys are all just much deeper than I am. I would have probably guessed that, you know, the most rewarding part is that, you know, you guys have guaranteed employment for decades to come. You know, this is an area that it's only going to need more and more and more. And unlike a lot of industries that really do run the risk of being obsolete, like this industry only needs more and more talent. Yeah. But maybe to that end, the next question is sort of an interesting one. From your perches, like where you guys sit, where do where do you see the need for specific expertise or specific talent? And, we have a room full of students. And so if they're thinking about directing their career, like, are there just certain niches or certain areas that you guys see that say, oh yeah, this is going to be huge? Like, so maybe Rashika, we can start there. Yeah.
That's a really hard question. Only because I feel like my answer is more like folks who can be a little bit more interdisciplinary. So people who are able to touch all aspects, understanding where like policy and regulation comes to play with like the technology aspect, as well as the implementation, as well as with finance. I'm also speaking with my current hat of this is what I do in my job is having to understand all of that. And it's been so incredibly valuable to be able to switch hats that quickly and be able to understand the full landscape, because so much of what really needs to be done right now is like strategy and implementation, especially as we're thinking about like the Inflation Reduction Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law, and all the money that's being theoretically poured out for it. It's like, how do we actually make that money and translate that into real projects? And so people who can kind of work at the scale of taking money, taking that and combining that with actual projects and implement and deploy, that's going to be really the key thing. And that requires a lot of varied skill sets and or people who can like be very versatile in their jobs. And I feel like that is something that, at least when we're thinking about how I am currently hiring right now, for example, like how we're thinking about that, like those are the types of roles that we're hiring for, is people who can wear multiple hats. However, there is still a massive need for people who are like experts in their specific like skill set. So I think especially with like the great round of layoffs and stuff that's happened across tech, there's still a lot of like really great talent of people who are very focused in, say, building out like technology systems, people who are very focused in like HR or marketing, and those skill sets that do need to come and help like smaller companies in the energy space probably scale up and actually like become to the point where they can like be functioning scalable companies that can have like hundreds of people in their employees. So also things to think about. It's a little bit multifaceted, but again, lots of jobs, lots of opportunities.
Great. Go ahead.
I guess I was going to jump on and do a simpler one, but I do feel the multifaceted definitely is a thing. But I was going to say, I think what we're seeing coming is grid technology and grid policy, like FERC and PUC, and like it is it's going to be tough to electrify everything, right? With what capacity? And even if we're talking bringing on green hydrogen or whatever comes next, that's all going to take additional grid capacity. And there's just a lot. There's so much in that space, and I think that's going to be a big one coming up. Well, it already is now, and so I can see how that's going to continue for sure.
So grid technology. So, like, what are you taking classes in to end up in grid technology?
Yeah, I mean, so I think like it's like, right, like engineering, whether it's civil, electrical, I could even see mechanical, right? Like I think any engineering field, I think you're pretty set. I mean, it's really going to come down to like, how are we doing microgrids? What does that look like? How can we do solar battery storage, and like and then what are the policies that go into play? So then it's like there's a handoff too on the policy side with like how are we allowing these assets to be on there? What does that look like? And working with regulators to really come into play to allow us to use these distributed energy resources and stuff going forward.
And I think I just want to build on that point around saying that I think, what the industry is ripe for disruption in the sense that you need to have more cost-effective solutions because there's never going to be enough money and enough time to actually expand the grid and reform the grid. So you have to have distributed energy resources in order to be able to ingest them into the grid. You have to be able to drive down the cost curve. And so a lot of the fundamental skill sets around systems engineering, power conversion systems, like those are just like core bread and butter. But beyond that, just software piece around like how you can, disrupt the grid with better grid management systems or software technologies that allow you to be able to control all these assets real time, whether it's millions of EVs or thousands of heat pumps. The way the world is headed, it does require a lot of orchestration at a platform level. and a lot of software that is needed that works in a very, very robust way with the power conversion system technologies. And also, I think it's one of the unique things about this industry is that it has in some ways been sheltered from all the changes that the consumers electronics business have gone through, where that consumer experience is so paramount to market share. And because historically the industry is so founded in just having monopolies run the grid, that taking consumer-centric view around how consumers will actually drive and adopt that change and how they live differently to the benefit of the grid is going to be significant as well. I think in terms of thinking through, that UX and those customer journeys and how you digitize that experience and such that you make it easier, because average consumer doesn't want to learn about kilowatt hours as much as I love to geek out on it. It is just, they want it simple and they want it to work, like you just said at the beginning, right? They still want the switch to turn on, but at the same time, we need these assets to be smarter, to be optimized, to react to the grid's needs, and that requires bringing all the convergence of all those basic skill sets.
So again, another thing to add is we're in a period of major onshoring of manufacturing in this country coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. So that's a tremendous opportunity for engineers, for technical skill sets to really be hands-on in helping develop new technologies. There's no silver bullet to the clean energy transition. There's no perfect technology. It's going to take a whole mix of everything that's out there today. It's going to take it's going to take refinements to what we do have today to continue to improve that. So, certainly electrical engineering skill sets, mechanical systems engineering, tremendous amount of opportunity, software side as well. And then on the regulatory front, there's a need to break into old systems that need to be turned upside down from the inside out within utilities, within departments of public utilities, public service commissions, state regulators that are setting incentive programs that are driving the adoption of clean energy technology. So there's just a tremendous amount of opportunity throughout all of those.
And one last thing I'll say, in addition to like the hard skills that you can probably pick up in classrooms, I think there's like a learning to speak the language aspect of energy that's a little bit harder to pick up unless you're kind of more immersed in it. And that's where like going to events like this, going to like, conferences, panels, listening to podcasts, that's what I always recommend in general. I think it's a really good way to get some additional context outside of the hard skills, and help kind of build some of the things that you might need to like be conversant on, understand what the actual challenges are in the industry that you want to work in.
Great. Well, maybe I take back then the comment about recommending engineering to my kids. It sounds like all of you guys recommended engineering. But no, that's great. Look, one of the things that's fascinating listening to all you talk is each of you are in completely different industries, completely different sort of careers, but you're all in kind of energy transition broadly defined. And so it really is fascinating. You're all in the same, affected by the same macro trends, even though you're in, very, very, very different sectors. Maybe just for interest, it's a little off the career journey, but talk about one or two challenges that you guys are facing in your specific sectors. What's impeding your job? What's making your lives more difficult that maybe need to be solved or will never be solved? You just have to deal with. Tom, you want to? Sorry.
Sorry, it's a hard one. I think that one of the challenges is mindset change, right? Like, I think, like, for example, we can't take all of the gasoline powered cars and make them electric and expect that we're going to solve the thing, right? There's a lot that goes into all those batteries. There's a lot that, where then we're talking about recycling and whatever. I think like, it's like big system changes like we were mentioning would be required. And so, thinking differently about how we can use assets, how we can really like incentivize public transit, other things. I think that the virtual nature post-pandemic has brought some new thinking around this, but I don't have an answer. It's just a challenge. As someone who's trying to electrify 5,000, 6,000 vehicles, right? Like it's going to be near impossible to do dump trucks, for example, in a scalable manner with what we have going on. So that's the first, I'd say. And then you said two.
Or whatever you want. You can pass the mic if you want.
No, and I think like policies, right? Like I think like really, really looking at how we can get more holistic progressive policies and what that looks like throughout. I think that's our biggest challenge. I mean, being in Pennsylvania, there's a lot of struggle. Like right now, I was talking earlier at the coffee chat around what's going into the latest building code in 2021 and the recommendations that are currently in to strip out all the energy efficiency measures, which then now takes away some of our ability to go after Inflation Reduction Act money because it doesn't meet what's required for that particular thing. And like what's the makeup of the legislature and what can we do there and how can we talk to our representatives? And I think like just making more people be aware that this is going on and having these conversations, I think is a big challenge because it can get a little wonky and boring for some. But clearly we're all super engaged into it. So I think it's like, how can we communicate better is one of the things that I'm working on solving that challenge.
So it's not true in every room, but I think in this room, we can all agree that we need more renewables. But can we agree on where they should be? And that's really been a huge challenge for us from a land use perspective, from an interconnection perspective as well. I'll give an example in Massachusetts, huge rise in solar development in the state ultimately led to transmission impacts from distribution connected solar projects, where you had a lot of projects sited in the center part of the state away from where load is. So then all the energy would trickle up from the distribution system, not catch load along the way and end up at the transmission system. Backlogged projects for a long time. So then you pivot to, okay, well, we should site projects, near where the load is. Well, carports are very expensive to construct because you have a lot of steel on the ground. You get more towards load pockets. You have more people. You have more not in my backyard concerns that come up from that as well. So land use is certainly a challenge of where can we locate these systems that serves the need and deploys the amount of energy that we need to deploy. And then from an interconnection perspective, you would think that utilities would be incentivized to locate projects near, where they do have load customers. But again, even when we were exploring large hospital campus in Metro Boston, behind the meter solar and energy storage system to serve their need, that triggered a transmission review. How does a behind the meter project that's serving load end up at the transmission system in a highly, congested area? So there's just sort of these broken systems that, again, that need to continue to be manipulated and improved over time.
I'm going to echo policy and regulation. So we're an independent nonprofit green bank. So theoretically, like we shouldn't be privy to rules that like the state of Pennsylvania is putting out because we don't get any funding from them. We shouldn't be privy to any of the other rules around like federal rules or anything like that because we're not getting money from them right now. However, there are still just general rules in this region that prevent us from making as much impact and investing in the type of energy tools that would actually like alleviate poverty and focus a little bit more on reducing utilities costs and utilities burden. And like case in point, like community solar, its legislation is not enabled in Pennsylvania. So while it's been great in like New Jersey and New York as a way of like reducing the cost of like energy for folks who are in low income communities, it's not going to work here. So we've had to essentially think of some very interesting workarounds for it. And while there is definitely a lot of lobbying and legislation that's happening at the state level to push things along, we can't always guarantee that that's really going to happen. And so it's kind of like figuring out new and innovative solutions or finding new like financing opportunities or working with cool companies to like figure out what those solutions need to be. That's really driving a lot of the work that we're figuring out, especially on the solar side of things, which is always a challenge. And then the second bit that I feel like doesn't get talked about a lot, but is really important is like change takes time. Like we have so many of these ideas and things that we really want to do. But for example, like I'm working on a project right now to get like a new financing mechanism for solar enabled. So where like any installer who's installing solar can offer this like new financing mechanism, and it's supposed to make it like super easy for folks to go solar and reduce some of the challenges that they would have to get like loans and not go through like a lot of the traditional like, I don't know, like credit check processes. Theoretically, it would be super easy, right? Like everyone should want to invest in this. All the installers that we want to work with should want to take this on. However, convincing folks who are providing financing for this particular project who would want to buy in for it, there's all these like restrictive processes that aren't changing because they're still thinking about financing and from a specific risk mindset, right? And so how do we get folks who are theoretically going to be helping support the energy transition to think about risk and financing in a different manner? That's where a lot of the work that the Green Bank does can play and have an impact on it. But we can't be the only people providing money to these projects. So we need to be able to leverage money from foundations, from like traditional sources of capital and things like that. So it's like working through some of those processes around changing like processes, but also like acknowledging that this is just going to take a little bit of time and getting folks comfortable with working on like what is defined incorrectly, in my opinion, as risky projects. But just like thinking about like what we call alternative underwriting has been a challenge that I wasn't expecting, but unfortunately makes up a significant portion of my day to day.
I think if I will just probably bring it back home to it, what my core function and why GM Energy exists within General Motors is to really drive the General Motors electrification journey, right? So we've come out and said that we're going to electrify all our assets by 2035, and GM is only going to build EVs at that point. And the interesting transition point we're in at this point, including all the OEMs in North America, is that as we're scaling the production capacity, onshoring manufacturing, getting that benefit, EVs still command a premium, right, over the ICE vehicles. So how do you really drive mass adoption? And one of the opportunities we see in the future, and one of the major barriers for that transition, is also the electric charging infrastructure, right? The fact there's not enough infrastructure in place. So it's kind of the chicken and the egg problem is, you have to have enough infrastructure, but until then, consumers are asking for minimum 300 miles, per charge, and that requires a bigger battery, which costs more, and then the EV becomes unaffordable. So how do you really drive EV affordability? But then we also see these, coming from the energy industry, these are batteries on wheels, right? They're tremendous assets, right? Majority of the time, the customer is actually not going to use more than 20% of that battery capacity. And how do we actually make that available to the grid? So we're investing in these technologies, to enable vehicle to home and vehicle to grid. And that requires like partnering with energy companies to help them see the value, working through the technical barriers, some of the regulatory barriers like around interconnection, but then more importantly, also getting consumers confident that you can discharge your battery without affecting your warranty. So for us, it's like we're trying to enter and create this new product category to help consumers understand that an EV can be a resource for the grid. It's an energy source as well as a mobility source. And in order for us to make that transition, we have to overcome the technical barriers and how you actually drive the cost curve down for the core product, the EV itself, and how you're going to interconnect with the grid. But then also leaning in on some of the regulatory challenges like interconnection, which, as was rightly said earlier, the renewable industry is facing. And I think the last piece is really around, giving consumers the choice that you can have and manage your own energy independence and have those energy choices, which has historically not been the way the markets are structured, right? And so to that end, it's for the first time ever in my career, we have a large OEM coming together, partnering, and we've got over 10 different partnerships with large utility companies, the largest IOUs in the country, trying to come up and solve for these solutions. And that's really what both excites me and keeps me up at night, because some days I wonder if it's ever going to happen, and there are other days where I can see the light at the end of the day.
Right. Well, I think each of you highlighted sort of policy and regulatory as being kind of just a key factor, impediment, but also part of the solution. So I guess on the one hand, my intuition was right 10 years ago that this is going to be an important part of it. But a question we were debating in my coffee chat earlier was, can regulators of this generation really get it and see and get done what needs to get done? Or to your point about time, do we need to wait for this generation to be, in the positions of power to where it'll be patently obvious what needs to be done? Like, are you seeing the type of progress, or are the things you want to do still, from a regulatory impediment, still a decade plus away?
Yeah, maybe I can start. And I think we definitely see pockets of regulation that is probably more progressive in the country. Like we look at California, New York, where regulators are really leading at the helm. At the same time, technology is advancing at a very rapid pace. Where I think as we look at the opportunity with bringing some of this innovative technology with distributed energy resources to the market, it's hard for regulators to say no, because you're lowering the technical barrier, you're lowering the commercial barrier or commercialization barrier. And I think so it's a forcing function that has to happen at the market level, at the technology level. And then from a policy perspective, I think what's also what we've found has been challenging is typically it's all you need to see the proof and the value, and that's when the regulator would invest or would allow the utility to invest. And we're trying to really accelerate that process. And like we've seen in North Carolina with Duke Energy, for instance, they've rolled out programs that allow the utility to go out and test these pilots in 3 months or less, which is like unheard of on a utility paradigm or scale. So I think that's the type of innovation we need, and we need to reward those outcomes, because not everything's going to work out. Many cases that you've learned something, but that technology isn't ready. And I think that is where the capital has to be incented, but just overall the market dynamic is such that it is so steady, patient capital with a steady return. And that's what the market rewards. And how do we shift that to say that, look, you are going to have some degree of risk here, and have regulation that encourages that. So I do believe that it can be done on both ends, on the top, and from the market itself.
And everybody doesn't have to, but if you got a view, feel free. Yeah.
I would say I agree. Or actually, I think the main thing is like around finding like good sources of capital, because I think risk is really the biggest barrier from my role/hat of like getting like acceptance about some of this work that needs to be done. And I think if there's ways to prove out how these technologies work and that they aren't going to be reducing like there are going to be like good projects, feasible projects, then you can think a little bit more about scaling. To your point about like working with Duke and some of the projects that they're doing, that's great to hear. And I know for like, unfortunately, I don't think a lot of states and municipalities can really like do those type of projects, but I do think that's the role of a lot of like private organizations, ones where, if the project fails, it's still like investment in something. And it's like working with organizations like selfishly green banks, like folks who do have the capacity to provide like capital, or like the DOE's like LPO program, where they are providing capital for like projects that are meant that could fail and that might not fail. Piloting more projects and piloting more programs, I really do think is going to be the key for proving this out at scale, but not a lot of organizations are able to or willing to take that on. And I don't think there will be acceptance until you see more of that proof, which is like a really chicken and egg kind of a situation, really, right?
So I just looked at the time, and I want to make sure we leave a few minutes for questions. So if we get no questions, we'll keep answering that one. But let's see, does anybody have questions for the panelists? Please don't be shy. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, so my name is Yasmin. I'm a sophomore in Wharton studying finance and energy with the engineering school. My question is, we've talked a lot about sort of how renewable energy works in the US, but I feel like one of the big stakes is when you look at emerging markets that are just constructing their grids and definitely don't have the kind of capital to be able to build a clean grid. So how do you kind of approach that? How do you see it in your jobs? Do you feel like the US has any sort of responsibility in terms of how we can approach the problem for emerging markets? Because their emissions is definitely what's going to drive the emissions of the world that we're going to live in tomorrow. So I just want to have your insights on that. Thanks.
So I think The only way that we particularly are currently focusing on is just through knowledge exchange. So we have like sister cities in different areas, and being a part of global groups like C40, and there's I'm trying to think non-US, but C40 specifically is a group that we work with, and then we partner with other cities, and we collectively talk. I'm also a part of a group, going back to the street lighting work, talking through, just sharing across cities. It's been, in like how are we using lighting technology and things like that, but that's not answering your question, which was around renewables specifically. And so I think it's just through knowledge sharing right now. Not really, yeah, how are we using technology, and how we do with them? What do our financial models look like, and how can they also maybe incorporate something similar? That's what we've been seeing. But other than that, I haven't been really into the manufacturing piece or anything.
Yeah, I'll just pick an example. I think I definitely think that knowledge transfer or technology transfer and how it lowers the cost for adoption for emerging economies is super important. But one of the things that like we're struggling with, for instance, in South America, we want to sell more EVs and the grid isn't ready. And to that end, we're actually actively partnering with the dealers in South America to say how we can actually help solve for creating microgrids that can actually deliver that capability. So help rebuild the grid in a way that actually promotes electrification, and so the grid is EV ready from the ground. So I think those are some of the use cases, and that requires orchestration of bringing capital partners who are ready to invest, bringing technologies that are market ready, and then also having that experience for execution. I think it was talked about earlier that being able to manage that transition, you need that certainty that investment is going to pan out, and bringing that level of expertise, which US is building very rapidly, and how you can actually bring that out from the service sector, I think is going to be very important as well.
I'll just chime in. You're absolutely right. There is an opportunity to cut a whole bunch of future carbon emissions off by getting it right the first time. But the reality is, so much of what's built is based on private capital, and if private capital can't see a path to sort of reasonable returns, let alone excess returns, it becomes very, very hard. So then you're really dependent upon concessionary capital. And I mean, you saw the whole world got together at COP28. They put together a horribly named loss and damage fund, right? That mustered a grand total of whatever it was, a few $100 million. You probably had multiple trillions of dollars represented at COP28, and the best they can do is come up with a couple $100 million to support, that very idea. So it's a tough one. I mean, it's a real quandary, but it's one that the world's going to have to grapple with. Yeah, please. This is probably the last question. So yeah.
Okay. Hi, I'm Yashanki. I'm at the law school. My question for you, Dominic. I'm interested in climate action at the subnational level. So I'm curious that Philadelphia aims to become carbon neutral by 2050. So how are you using energy transition to also become climate resilient?
So hopefully, we get everything that we asked for from the Inflation Reduction Act. We have a lot of pending grant applications. But one of the way is like our health centers, for example. We were hoping to put solar with battery storage on our health centers, get us away from diesel backup fuel generators for those facilities, and then having battery backup. So that's part of our application. Hopefully we get in. If anyone knows anyone at DOE, maybe you can put in a good word. And so, kind of those are the kind of things that we're kind of thinking through. We're also right now talking through the water department, when we go through solid waste management, deals with a lot of biogas, and can we refine that biogas in a way that becomes renewable natural gas that we can then take those a lot of it comes from attribute claiming. And so like, can we claim the attributes from the renewable natural gas that we could then potentially re-inject into our Philadelphia Gas Works. I'm trying to watch my acronyms. PGW. And so, what are ways that we can work to really move that forward? And I don't know if you saw also what's going on with the hydrogen hub in our region. And so I think having multiple ways, I think like for energy to come through. Just my last thing I'll say is like, last winter we had the first demand response event in over a decade, which is basically a call for us to take action to reduce our energy consumption because the grid was unstable. And I don't know how many people know how close we were to having brownouts in our region, but it was scarier than it should have been. And it was over the Christmas holiday, which would have, I'm sure, put a damper on a lot of people's holidays. So, like, how can we avoid that in the future? And so, like, what additional capacities could we bring in? And a lot of it came from the freezing of the pipes of natural gas. And so, I don't think people were thinking that would freeze, right? And I think people are very quick to blame renewables for power issues. And, so it was interesting in that case. So I think it's like a multi-pronged approach. There's not just one answer. And it's like, how can we kind of come at it with different energy solutions? Yeah, it's tough. We're working on it.
Great. Well, I just want to thank all of you for coming, and certainly all of our panelists. This was a great panel, and hopefully everybody is more excited now rather than less excited for entering maybe a career in the energy transition space. So thank you all. Thanks to our panelists. We give them a round of applause. And I'd just like to invite everybody downstairs for hors d'oeuvres and maybe cocktails, cocktails. So great. So please enjoy and hopefully continue to enjoy Energy Week for our last day tomorrow. Thank you. Yeah, this was great.